Welcome in, welcome once again to the newest edition of 3 In, 3 Out, the most unique Seahawks recap show in the multiverse. I'm your host, Clinton Bonner. This is part of the Seahawkers Podcast Network. And if I'm Clinton Bonner, then you know I am joined by the one, the only, the great Brandan Schultz. And in addition to that, we got Montana Seahawker, our good buddy, Mr. Adam Emmerich. This is a 3 In, 3 Out off-season spectacular. What do we say to the doldrums, boys? What do we say to the doldrums of Seahawks NFL season? What do we say, Adam? What do we say?
Good luck with this, all you boring times. We're coming for you. We're bringing some content. We're going to have some fun. It's been a minute since we talked some Seahawks. I've been jonesing a little bit. I know you have been too, Clinton. And I think this is going to be a fun little exercise here because you know what? This is the time of the year where nothing happens. And I'm sick of nothing happening. Let's make something happen. Let's do it. Come on, Brandan.
Make a list. Make a list.
Make chanting and making lists and lists about chanting. My favorite things in very late June. And, you know, it is list season and it's best shape of their life season. Actually, we just kind of got out of that with OTAs. It's kind of list season. And I rail a little bit on the clickbait stuff that's out there, and I pride ourselves a bit on coming up with at least something fun to talk about, like unique, stir some conversation, make you, the listeners and the viewers, think about it a bit as well. And Brandan, if they're viewing us, well, where the heck are they viewing us?
Probably on YouTube, youtube.com/Seahawkers podcast. But you can always subscribe via audio, listen there too. But whether you enjoy us on the YouTube platform or on the podcast platform, not Stitcher anymore, apparently, because that's going away.
Gone.
But it's you can just go to SeahawkersPodcast.com and you can find all the ways to listen there. You can find ways to support us. GetInTheFlock.com is one of them. So all the ways to reach out to us there too. And if you want to shoot us an email, give us something to talk about on an upcoming show, go Hawks at SeahawkersPodcast.com. There's all the things.
Wow. That's a list unto itself, right? Not a Seahawks list, but a Seahawkers podcast list. And please do hit the likes, hit the subscribe to the audio, leave the reviews, the whole thing. It all helps. And this is 3 In, 3 Out. So you might be like, well, I don't remember the show, or maybe you're new to Seahawkers podcast and you haven't even experienced a 3 In, 3 Out yet. It's typically a recap show, meaning it's a game review show where we really, really like to look at the nooks and crannies and little things within the game that let's call it the national media certainly won't be talking about, individual contributions, individual plays, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to get to these little groovy, finite little things on this particular offseason spectacular. So I'll lay it out there for everybody. You can see it behind me, maybe totally, but we got floor versus ceiling. So I've got 6 categories, hence 3 in, 3 out. And we're going to pit these two fine gentlemen from Montana against each other. One's going to have to tackle the floor debate. One's going to have to tackle the ceiling debate. We'll see who goes first. Gentlemen, let's go to Adam. Pick a number between 1 and 12.
Oh, geez. Well, as a true Seahawks fan, I should probably pick 12, right? But
that's the number. You hit it. That's it. That's it. It was a pop quiz. It was a trick question. You nailed it. The number is 12. All right. So how about this? Dealer's choice. Would you like to argue ceiling or floor first? I won't tell you the category.
Well, since everybody says I'm the negative Nancy, then I'll just take the floor, and we'll let Pollyanna Brandan take the ceiling. I know he's going to enjoy that a lot more. So let's do that.
Take the middle, but I guess.
Yeah. Right.
That's my job here. I've got the net minder, if you will, the tennis dude, a line judge. I don't know what they call them in tennis. Umpire? Are they umpires? Either way, the dude that Macro yelled at a lot in the chair. So, all right, our first category, we'll start macro. We'll get more micro. It is 3 in, 3 out. Brandan, we're going to go ceiling first. So basically Adam did what he loves to do. He deferred to the second half. He gets the ball in the second half. This is all working out lovely. All right. So Seahawks schedule, we know it's out.
Too much. So I'm going to say a ceiling for our Seahawks would be 13-4. And the reason I would make that prediction, I mean, it's just hard to win any more than 13 games in the NFL. When's the last time that we really saw teams, I mean, unless they're a really complete team.
Well, the Vikings won 13 last year, just for the record.
That's a pretty decent division too. So, okay, well, I'll take that as that's a pretty good ceiling then. And the way they get there is through the improvement on the defense. Offensively, they can really stay pretty much what they were last year. And I think they could make that happen. The team within the division that would give the Seahawks the most trouble, obviously, is the San Francisco 49ers. But we don't know who their quarterback is going to be. And so if they're having quarterback issues, the rest of the division is terrible. There's 6 wins right there. And then all they have to do is go out and get 7 other wins along the way. Easy as that, right?
Easy, simple math. 7 + 6 is 13. And just, I'm not going to go over the entire schedule. We have to argue the floor still here. To get there, we're talking about having to beat a smattering of teams such as the Lions, right? Playoff team. Well, nearly a playoff team, got us into the playoffs, but at Detroit. Giants, playoff team, at New York. The Bengals, at Bengals. Cleveland, which is just a weird team. Baltimore Ravens, at Baltimore. The Niners you mentioned, at Cowboys, and then home versus the Eagles, just going through a smattering there. And then a Pittsburgh Steelers team that won 9 games because Tomlin's Tomlin, and they're always tough. So 13,
you were prepared to knock down my 17-0 argument right there. I found at least 4 games that could be.
There you go.
Tough.
So of those, we're winning a good chunk of them, and then kind of run the table to get to 13-4. I like it still. It's bold, but then again, the Vikings did it last year, and they weren't that good of a team. It's kind of just a lot of luck. We're better than they are. All right, Adam, over to you. This is not the easiest schedule. Upon a relook at it, in my opinion, what's our floor, and why are you picking it?
All right, well, let's start with, if it's an easier or hard schedule. You don't know. Brandan doesn't know. I don't know. And anybody who tells you beforehand that they know that this is an easy or a hard schedule is full of catfish. They just are, because you don't know what any of these teams are really going to be. You have an inkling, but this could be the year that the Niners just have another injury implosion and they end up not being good for the year. Or the Browns jump up and Watson finds it again. Like, who would have picked the Seahawks to do what they did last year? So,
not really.
Well, all of us kind of did, but not a lot of the national punditry did. So when I think about what their floor is, I do think it's as unlikely as the Niners totally imploding, the Browns being good, or Tua winning MVP, or any of these super unlikely things. I think the floor would be super unlikely, but it could be around, I'm oscillating, but I'm going to say 7 wins as your floor. And it could go a little like this. You could end up splitting with the Rams because they always play you tough, and you play them first week of the year when they've got all their dudes, the few dudes that they have. They could be actually tough right out of the gate. So you split with the Rams. Colt McCoy is a backup quarterback, even though he's starting. So they have a tendency, the Arizona team, to beat us with their backup quarterback. So you split with them, and then you get swept by the Niners. So they're your 2-4, just right there in division. And then there's that stretch that starts, let's see, I think it's the weekend before, the Thursday before Thanksgiving. Niners, Cowboys, Niners, Eagles.
That actually starts on Thanksgiving. That Thursday is the Thanksgiving game.
No, the first Thursday, November 23rd. Oh, that's
yeah, we play Thursday, but the first one is Thanksgiving versus the Niners.
Okay. I thought we had Cowboys on Thanksgiving. Well, I read it wrong. Anyhow, brutal stretch. And let's say they go 0-4 there, and then the finger pointing starts, and they end up with one of the next 3 in the Titans, Steelers, and Cards. And all of a sudden you're around 6-7 wins. That would be how it happened. And Geno would have to be worse than second half of the year. Geno, the defense would have to be, well, there's dumpster fire as it was last year. It would have to be total trash as well. So that's how you'd get there. I do think it's unlikely, though.
By Adam's math, I counted 4 losses to the 49ers within his explanation there. So yeah, that would definitely help.
2-4 in the division. I counted 4 losses against the Niners. You don't math well, bud.
So we're going to flip-flop this, all right? So now, Adam, you've got to take a ceiling here, okay? Seahawks defense points allowed. I want to remind folks that in 2022, we weren't very good. 24.6 points per game allowed, which was good in quotes for 25th in the league. So very certainly bottom third and not very good across the board. So predict and argue our ceiling, meaning what's our best defensive outcome that you could foresee and why?
What would be like a top 5 points per game from last year? Like around 20, 21?
No, well, I know like the Niners were like 17.9, Jets were like 18.6. So it kind of crept into the 2021 zone by the time it got to the 4 or 5 range.
Okay. All right. So right about there. I would say their ceiling is probably right about 20 points per game. And it would definitely have to have a stellar season from Witherspoon, another build on it performance from Tariq Woolen. You're going to have Jamal Adams healthy for the whole year. Diggs is going to have to be who Diggs is for another year, even though he's getting a little older. All of the defensive line additions are going to have to really, really pop. I mean, Cam Young's going to have to really pop. Jaron Reed's going to have to really pop. Draymond Jones is going to have to do his thing. And if you can do that, and Bobby Wagner, if he can be the exact same player that he was last year for the Rams, which was super duper high level, and you marry all 3 of the levels of the defense together, all of a sudden you're talking about a top 5 defense in points per game. Now, the other thing that they're going to have to do, they've had a drought with this over the last few years. They got to get back to creating turnovers on a little bit more of a regular basis. And I know it's random and I know it's hard to, really preach that, but maybe just instead of just one day a week in practice, like turnover Thursdays, isn't that what it is? Maybe make it turnover Tuesdays and turnover Thursdays and really work on that. But they can do that.
On your day off and work on turnovers.
Exactly.
There you go.
That sounds like how you get better at something, right? Do it a day off. That's it.
There you go. So yeah, I would say right about 5th in the league for points per game. That feels like the ceiling for this defense. I don't think they're going to be one of the elite top 2 units like Eagles, and even they may step back with some of their losses, or Niners, or some of the other teams you think of.
Yeah. Well, I think it's and Brandan, before we pass to you to get the floor side of this equation, just listening to the Bootleg Football podcast of they dropped the Seahawks one today, and they go through a bunch of interesting stats, and some of the stuff they share is like the infrequency in which we blitz and the infrequency in which we run stunts. So Adam, you just talked about, hey, we need to get better at causing turnovers, right? Get more consistent. And yes, there's randomness. However, we were like 20 something in the league, like 26th or something, when we were in 3rd and 7 or longer and still didn't blitz, right? So like, just like, that's a way to cause havoc, send the extra dude, especially now with Witherspoon and Tariq. I feel like you draft a guy like Witherspoon so that you can send that extra dude on 3rd and 7 or longer and cause that havoc, get the tip ball, and then get your turnovers or get the strip sack. So hopefully we can do that and see ourselves shoot to the top 5, or I'd settle for top 10 right now if we could. Brandan, what do you got for what could go wrong and see us, worse or where we were last year?
Yeah, it's really easy to argue the opposite when Adam had to list all of the ifs to make the top 5, right? Because you just take all those and you say, well, if none of those, or if very few of those happen, then this defense is going to look an awful lot like it did last season. And if that's the case, then they're going to be on the bottom end. I don't see them necessarily being the worst, because when you have pieces in the secondary like they do with Quandre Diggs and adding Devin Witherspoon and Tariq Woolen coming back, like it's difficult to see the passing side of the defense be bad. So I think the floor really is probably, I'd say in the bottom 10, so probably around 22. And because I think the passing part of the defense will be able to hold them up. Is it the running part? And that's the part that you worry about, because within the division, those are going to be some running teams. You play them twice, and that could be what drags the defense down a little bit if they can't get that solidified this season.
Well, I like that the floor is still an improvement, right? If we got to 22 or so, were you saying 22nd overall, 22 points per game?
Oh, 22nd overall. So what would that would probably be around 27 points per game, I would.
Oh, 27 would be bad. We allowed 24.6 last year, and that was 25th. So, you know, if we're, so I got what you're saying though, like even at our worst, you think slightly better improvement across when compared to the league is our floor for this year.
Right. Compared to the league.
Yeah, not that bad. Adam, what do you think of that floor? Do you think we could blow past it to the negative, or do you think that's about right?
Oh, they could easily be the worst defense in the league. Like if you're going to talk about their actual floor, sure. They'd have been the worst defense in the league last year if they had that one little stretch of about 4 games where they fooled us all by just simplifying gap discipline and things like that they said that they had done to make it so that the team performed better. And then everybody figured it out and it was over. They could easily stack, 16 games of that, 17 games of that. Like you could do that. Like that could happen. Their floor last year was so bad that all it takes is just that not having that one good little stretch, and all of a sudden you're the worst in the league. They were historically bad against the run last year for the majority of the like worse than anybody has ever bad. So that's in range. I don't think that's going to happen. I do think that they're going to be an improved unit. If they end up being around, I don't know, 13th in the league in points per game, we're probably going to be a 11-win team.
I think absolutely, because we're going to score points. We're going to score points as long as our floor.
I thought we were predicting where we thought these places were, not just arguing for them being the best or worst.
No, we are predicting, and then you got to defend your argument.
So when we talked about the floor for the overall record, right? I didn't pick 0, because that's absurd. There's no way that they're not going to win at least 7 games. You go down and you look at the schedule. You're like, okay, 7 of these are pretty winnable, especially with the way things are this year. I look at the defense from last year and some of the worst stretches that they had, and it is not just worst that year. It's the worst
where
ever.
They were the worst, right?
Yeah, and so that's what I'm saying. Their floor could be the 32nd, the lowest.
Well, those are for stretches though, and that's why they've done that in the past where they have those stretches and then they find their way to make it, so they're not the worst. And so that's why I think that I
think we can settle this part and just all agree that the Arizona Calebs, the Cardinals there, are really, really bad, right? So they're 32nd, our floor is 31. Brandan, you're going to get the fun one here, or the positive one. Let's call it that. This is Geno Smith passing yards. And Adam, we know you love to say yards don't matter, and especially passing yards don't matter. And it's still kind of cool to look at, hey, Geno Smith had 4,282 yards last year, which was better than, more yards than Russ has ever thrown as a Seattle Seahawk and as a Bronco, right? His entire career. We get JSN. What is Geno Smith's ceiling as a passer this year? And, let's go take a look at some of the, who are the leaders that typically in the 5,000. What did Brady have? Like 7,200 yards last year or something like that, right? They threw the ball everywhere. But, your top dudes are typically 5,100, 5,200. Then you get like a gaggle in the high 4,000s. And then you start to kind of get into where Geno was last year, which was pretty darn good, that 4,300 range. Brandan, where do you see Geno ending up this year?
If he were to improve upon last year, and there's the potential for it, right? Because if you're getting him better protection on the offensive line, if the center position gets solidified, if removing Gabe Jackson from the equation, if somehow just having unity then on the offensive line gives him better protection, if having a running game that people are concerned about makes for some more open lanes in the passing game that they can exploit, for him to do 4,600 yards, that's maybe even being conservative. So let's say the ceiling being 4,800 yards. I don't think 5,000. I think that's a little bit unrealistic to think of him as, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, those Mahomes, types of guys. Yeah. Mahomes. Yeah. I just, because of the system within which he plays with Pete Carroll. I don't think I could go into the fives, but I could see 4,800. I think we're talking, what, 280 yards per game on average over the course of a 17-game season.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's within range if you take all those things into an account and have the group of receivers that we haven't seen from a Seahawks team in ever.
Yeah. So just to give a little bit of like where, by the way, last year he was 7th overall in yards, 1 yard behind Josh Allen. Yes, Josh Allen had the UCL injury, and that dinged him for sure. The ceiling was Pat Mahomes last year, 52-50, kind of nice. And then a big drop off, Justin Herbert, 47-39. So if we're talking now, that's not going to exactly map to this year. We know that. But if we're talking a ceiling being around 4,800, then we're saying he's like probably second
top
or third
three
in the league.
Yeah, Mahomes, Allen.
Yeah, top three, right? I mean, even Joe Burrow had under 4,400 last year. So it's a pretty interesting level up there. And I think we talked a little bit about like, hey, if we look at like 10% more pass attempts with Geno's accuracy and his deep ball accuracy, which was tops in the league, it's not just about like, it's not dinking and dunking. A lot of times it's the deeper shots downfield where he was incredibly efficient. And yeah, you could get those, he could be quite efficient with 10% more passes potentially. And Adam, I know you're chomping at the bit to give a good argument to what's the floor, but also maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. I bet you're going to spin it that way as well. So what is Geno's floor in terms of yards?
Yeah, it's funny because you say not the worst thing in the world. I do agree with that. And also too, like if he does end up around 4,800 yards, which by the way was the number in my head, Brandon. So like you're right on it, I think. Things have gone horribly wrong. If Geno ends up at 4,800 yards, that means that we're in a shootout every week and the defense is getting trampled and the run game is completely ineffective with K9 and Charbonnet. So that would be an unhealthy good case for Geno. I think the floor is probably closer to, because he was at 4,200 last year, right? Seahawks franchise record.
Almost 43, 42-82. Yeah.
Yep. I think his floor is maybe like 3,700 yards, 3,800 yards. I don't think the regression that some fear is at all plausible. I just don't. I watched the way that he played last year within structure, within the system, and using the weapons around him in a way like a very professional quarterback does with his rhythm, his feet, and all the timing that goes into all that in the precision throwing, like you mentioned, Clinton, all the way down the field. So I don't think the floor is very low. I don't see that sort of regression. I think what's likely is he's going to have less than 4,200 yards for the year. And I think that's going to be a combination of K9 having a full season as a starter, whoever is the starting center and right guard making a difference on the interior, and the run game really clicks. And hopefully they're running a lot out of 11 personnel rather than throwing all the time. I see the ceiling, what Brandon was talking about, if they fall in love with the 3 wides thing and it's just JSN all the time. I'm hoping to see JSN like, I don't know, 50% of the snaps, 55, like somewhere right in there. And that would be perfect. So yeah, I don't think the floor is as low as maybe others do.
Well, that's interesting. And I do wonder what other people do think about a 3,800 yard floor. And a few things to point out too. It went Geno Smith at 42.82. Trevor Lawrence was 41.13, and he's on the up. He had a great end of the season and trajectory is pretty high. But then there was a shelf. The next dude was Jalen Hurts at 3,700, 3,701. So you had dudes like Aaron Rodgers. Well, Tua was right. He had his challenges. Yeah. Russ also had some challenges, but even Derek Carr, 35.22. So it really, Daniel Jones, 3,200 yards, right? So it really kind of fell off after that kind of tier from a yard perspective. And when we did our projection show, the prediction show a couple of weeks ago now, my favorite season-long bet was Vegas saying Geno's going to get like 3,800 something yards. That was Vegas's line. And I'm like, oh, hammer the over, hammer it. Hammer it. I do think I can easily see, I think the floor is more like 4,000, which is, it doesn't seem like a huge amount, but that 5% variance makes me want to take that bet. But it's an interesting thing to say, well, 3,800 still, like I said, Jalen Hurts was 3,701 last year. Okay.
And that one seemed to me like where I would put the floor is if the run game is working, if you're going to more of a possession type offense and trying to limit the amount of downfield shots, which Pete Carroll doesn't tend to do. But if you want to, keep the defense off the field as much as possible, if you want to run the ball effectively, then 37 probably would be my argument.
Yeah. And I think if I had a place which ways to go one way or the other, let's say 45 or 4 or 3,900, I think there's a better shot. We're at 4,500 yards. I just do because of how they've aligned this team. And I also don't think that means we're throwing the ball more. Like, I don't think that means, I think it means we're more successful. I don't think it means we're throwing the ball more as a percentage.
How many yak yards are you giving JSN already?
It's not the yak yards. It's 10% more attempts by Geno, and it's not because.
And that would be a disaster.
No.
Here's an improvement on third down is what
that's the thing. Here's the math. We have the ball longer. We just run more offensive plays, like, because we're a better team. We run more offensive plays, and the spread or the composition of what we run is still Seahawky. We just do what we do, but 10% more bump while we just maintain our balance, and we can kind of have our cake and eat it too. So that's what I'm hopeful for. I think we're going to be offensively better than we are defensively. So
if they are more efficient, though, then you're going to see an increase in the run game late in the game, which is then going to reduce your overall possessions because then you're running the ball more. And then those things just tend to balance themselves out.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Like, you made fun of me a little bit about yards don't matter. And I'm fine with that because they just don't. Think about it. Geno Smith set the all-time franchise record for passing yards last year, and we were bounced in the first round.
Yeah.
Where'd that get us?
Well, from a team that we couldn't, as you've said 1,000 times, right? We could not stop the run. And then when the Niners stopped kind of dicking around, they just jellied it down our throat and said game over, right? So and Geno was the reason we were in that game until halftime, because he was throwing dimes everywhere, right? So there's kind of the yin and yang there, which is fun to argue. We did mention that the whole crux of this is how our rushing game performs, which is kind of a nice segue, as we would call it. So I think we're now at the ceiling argument. And I think it is, Adam, I think this is back to you. So Seahawks rushing game last year, 119.2 yards per game. That was good to be 18th in the league. So below average, if you will, 119.2. What's our ceiling? And is that ceiling a great thing, good thing, bad thing, negative? What's the ceiling for the Seahawks, and why are you arguing for it?
Yeah, so you'd written down here that in 13 they had averaged, what was it here? You said 137.6, and that was 4th in the league.
Correct. I thought it was a cool data point to be like, when we were beast mode and we won the whole darn thing. Yeah. What was it, right? 4th in the league, almost 140 yards per game, right?
Yeah. And, I saw that. I was like, well, yeah, right there. That's the ceiling. That's it, is right about 140 yards a game. I think it's wishful thinking to think that it could be really much more than that, but just for a few reasons. Lucas and Cross are going to get stronger this offseason, having a full offseason to put the muscle on and be professional football players. It's a huge deal for those types. They'll be better in the run game. And then Damian Lewis, still a road grader at left guard. I think he's an excellent guard. A lot of people think he's average. I think he's a little better than that, but whatever. Whether it's Evan Brown or Olu, it's an upgrade over the whipping boy, Austin Blythe. And just that size is going to make a big difference in the middle. Now, whether that ends up being Phil Haynes, which I hope not, I hope that Bradford turns out to be the real deal as a late round pick. That, with K9 having as many touches as he's going to get. I know a lot of people are like, oh, don't draft him in fantasy. He's not going to get that many touches because Charbonnet's there. Charbonnet's going to be the solid number 2. I think a lot of people are going to be a little disappointed in how many carries that Charbonnet gets overall, because K9 is that damn good. Charbonnet's going to be, in terms of touches, Travis Homer plus. Like, he's going to take
that
up.
Feels light. That feels light to me, but I hear you. You know,
where's the extra carries when they're also going to be? Yeah, they're also going to be throwing the ball a lot with the trio of receivers and Colby Parkinson and Disley and all that. I just don't think he's going to get a ton of opportunities unless K9 got injured. So, but that 1-2 punch with a young, improving offensive line, yeah, they could be right in the mix at around 140 yards a game. That would be a coup if they're doing that. We're talking, and the defense could just be middle tier. We're talking a Super Bowl berth possibility. Like we're in the NFC Championship game if they can do that.
It feels like a very healthy way for this team to succeed, right? Like a very effective way for this team to succeed, and
consistent way to
succeed. And that's how Pete wants to play football, right? He's still the Man-to-Man podcast. He went on there and talked about. He's like, no, that's just the way you play football. Still, he's like, that's
because it is.
He ain't wrong. Last year, just to throw some more stats out there too, and kind of project that beast mode team of 137.6 2022 season, it would have placed us as 8th overall, which by the way, I think is kind of funny in a league that, running doesn't matter. You don't run the ball. Running backs don't matter. Okay. A decade ago, we were 4th at that number. It would have only been 8th, right behind like the Niners, the Giants, the Browns, which still have a heck of a run game, Ravens, Eagles, Falcons who had no quarterback whatsoever, and they didn't really have. It was like Mariota was scrambling for his life, not like Justin Fields. Chicago was number 1. Atlanta still averaged 160, and now they got Bijan, and they have a good offensive line. I'm just saying, watch out for the Falcons. I think they're okay. But the point being, if we were
that quarterback, man, nope. Well, that's a hard no.
I understand that, but they are going to run the crap out of the ball, and then dink and dunk. They will.
Well, that's fine. They did that last year with Mariota and didn't make the playoffs. What, you think they're going to be an ounce better with Ritter?
I hear you, but they win 7 games when they were supposed to be putrid. I just think it's a bad division too. It's a lot of opportunity there. But the overarching point of 140 still puts us, let's put it this way. If we're 140 as a ceiling, we're pretty much like the best of the teams that don't have like a pure running quarterback, right? It's like, it's not Baltimore. It's not the Eagles. It's not Justin Fields in Chicago. The only other one is really Cleveland. Watson doesn't run that much. Nick Chubb is just an absolute monster. We should have drafted him, but that's okay. All right, Brandon, we got to get to the floor now. So rushing floor, how do we get there? Good, bad, or ugly? What's the prediction? And how do you argue for a floor like that?
Well, I think you pointed out in terms of if you're comparing it to the rest of the league, if the trend is now to run the ball more, if you have a lot of these young teams who are finding, like the Lions who ended up drafting a running back really early in Jahmyr Gibbs, the Falcons who drafted a running back early. So I could easily see having the average from last year and that being still in the bottom, at least in the bottom half of the league, because you do have to spread the ball around to your guys on offense and DK Metcalf and drafting JSN and Tyler Lockett. So there is that component of the game. You want to get the ball to your playmakers and your receivers. But still the floor could be then reduced based on the defensive factors, right? If they're having to play catch up because they're falling behind early and they're getting away from the run. So I think the floor, it would be over 100 yards per game, likely.
I hope.
Yeah.
It better be.
But it does speak to that idea of it being unhealthy if they're in the bottom third of the league in terms of your playoff outcome. But I'd say floor 115 yards per game ish, probably. And that is because of not having the running quarterback as the factor. And I'm with Adam too, as far as Kenneth Walker being the guy that would be. Charbonnet is the running back insurance. If things go badly with injuries, Pete Carroll does not want to be in the same situation that he's been in previous years, where the top guy gets hurt and then they don't have anybody to come in. A solid number 2, as Adam put it earlier.
I think he said, so now we have a soft number 2 and a solid number 2. I think that means this category is done. All right, so we're going to stick on the offensive side. We're going to go back to ceiling. Brandon, it's your microphone here. This one is very specific. This is touchdowns by only 3 people, right? It's not the wide receiving core. This is not touchdowns by Geno. This is take out the tight ends, take out any touchdowns to the running backs, any of that stuff. Any, Percy Harvin throws it to Geno somehow, like, no, doesn't count, right? This is touchdowns by 3 people, DK, Lockett, and JSN. And to put a little stats on it, 2022, DK and Lockett had 15. And people might forget, DK actually only had 6 touchdowns last year. Lockett had 9. Kind of, was that 15?
9
yes,
and
that's
15.
15. Yes, 9, yes.
6, 15.
Did the math. 2021, it was a bit inverse. DK had 12. Lockett was still, Lockett had 8. I think Lockett went like 8, 10, 8, 10, 9 the last 5 years, which is pretty freaking remarkable. So the ceiling, predict it and argue. What's the ceiling for DK, Lockett, and JSN total touchdowns?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at ceiling, it would probably be in the 10, 11 range for each of your primary targets, and DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and then 5 for JSN. So I think that would put the ceiling around 26, which would be huge, because then you're talking about your running backs. If they catch a receiving touchdown, your tight ends. If it's 26 for those 3 guys, you're probably talking about Geno Smith having 35, 36 touchdowns on the season, which would be incredible.
Right. And that was the kind of the back math I was thinking about too. And I thought where it might evolve to. He had 30 last year in the regular season, then two in the playoff game, right? I think the first 2, maybe, I think it was only 2. Yeah. He might have had a third later in the game when it was kind of over.
And I think you can improve on the DK numbers. 6 is low for him, and just finding him in the end zone more often. If the receiving threat is there, if the rushing threat is there, that makes it to where you have your full complement of guys there in the red zone. I think Geno, finding DK 10 times in a season, not hard to do.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I agree. I think it is somewhere around there. Maybe even a smidgen higher. I'm probably the biggest JSN, fan in this particular trio so far.
You couldn't go 10 touchdowns on average for each of them, though.
No, I'm not saying it's 30. I think that's my ceiling in my brain was probably 20, 28 was probably where I would.
So
take
one
it,
higher than I would.
Which is still, well, you had 26, but which is still crazy though, because then the whole point is, then you're talking about Geno approaching 40 touchdowns just in general, because he's going to get some others. And is that, it's not that it's not likely, is that a real potential ceiling? And maybe it is, but then it might be like, whoa, is this the team we want? Which I think keeps going back to what Adam is, I've been talking about really all offseason.
With the touchdown passes, I think that's not going to be indicative of the team that you want, because you just want a team that can score within the red zone. So I don't know if rushing touchdown, passing touchdown, it doesn't matter what you get in terms of those types of numbers. I don't think it would
touchdowns.
You want touchdowns in the red zone.
Touchdowns good. All right. So if it's touchdowns bad or touchdowns low for those 3 guys, what's the floor, Adam, and why would you argue it?
We said between this year and last year, it was 20 last year, 15 the year before for Tyler and DK combined?
Yeah, 15, 22 in 2022,
Okay.
20 in 2021.
All right. The floor is 15. That's basically it right there. They're not going to get fewer touchdowns when you have somebody like JSN come in and able to do the jitterbug things that you need to do in the red zone. Like, that's the quick separation and setting guys up and getting stuff in a short space. Like, that's what we need desperately in the red zone, because Geno, most of those touchdowns that Geno threw to the wideouts, those were bombs, baby. Yeah. Like, he was throwing them deep downfield. We were god awful in the red zone for the most part. So I don't think it gets much lower than 15. I don't think we're going to come close to the ceiling that Brandan predicted. Now, not saying he's wrong about what the ceiling could be. I'm just saying it's just extremely unlikely, because I am a huge believer in the improvement of this offensive line this year, and then another year for K9. If we're going to be better at scoring points as an offense, we need to be able to pound the rock with, 20 yards in. Like, you just have to. That combination of JSN, there's no way they do fewer than they did last year in terms of touchdown as a trio. No way.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly safe and logical floor. I think it's probably too, I agree. I think you argue that it's almost too low of a floor. And I think it is too. I think just because I think JSN is going to score some, and I can't see DK getting less than 6, and Lockett's just Lockett. Again, this whole exercise is taking out injury, right? So they all
at some point when you're talking about, it's still the same amount of pass attempts that go into a season, right? So now you're just breaking up those touchdowns into 3 buckets instead of 2.
Well, but you could
I don't see the massive game.
You could take them from the tight ends, or you could say whatever the touchdowns are to our running backs, which is not that much because we can't screen.
Yes,
and we don't get that many touchdowns through the air to our running backs. It just doesn't happen that much. Really, it probably comes from the tight end crop. But I also do think that we will throw the ball a bit more just because I think that's the trajectory of the team and what Waldron wants to do and why you take a player like JSN. However,
let's hope not. We threw the ball too damn much last year. We don't need to be throwing the ball more.
I love it. I love it. I like the way we play football. I do. I like our balance. I just think we're going to be in 11 personnel, obviously more than last year, and we're going to throw the ball more, just a little bit more. And so I think it's the propensity or the odds are in the favor of a few more touchdowns is my guess. But fun exercise.
You have to account for the touchdowns that went to Marquise Goodwin last year. Those could be the same amount of touchdowns that end up going to JSN. So you've subtracted one of your primary touchdown targets from last season, and you're moving it to another target in JSN.
One more category. It might be my favorite. This is going to be Adams for the ceiling and to predict and argue first. So I think if you ask the average Seahawkers podcast listener and you said, how many sacks did Nwosu have last year? They'd say 9.5. It's a number we all know, 9.5. By the way, that was good for 20th in the league. We discussed a couple of times over that they think there was only, 17 or 18, because there was a couple of guys tied at 9.5. 17 or 18 dudes, the whole league who had 10 or over. That's it for the entire league. And the Eagles had 4 of them. So most teams didn't have a 10 sack guy, including the Seahawks. They had 2 guys at 9.5. But a big stat that sometimes gets overlooked, but it's a really important stat, is tackles for a loss. And so Nwosu last year, he had 12 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 19th. So I thought that kind of parity was really interesting. 20th with sacks, 19th with tackles for a loss. So what's Nwosu's ceiling on this team for TFLs, and why could it be that high? Adam, you got the ball.
It's 18.
Ooh,
and
that's big.
I know that sounds like a lot, but this would be his ceiling and best case scenario. Cam Young's the real deal up front, and he does his thing, just chewing up blocks. Draymond Jones is a monster inside, and they're constantly doubling him. Jamal Adams is healthy and flying around the ball down by the line of scrimmage, and they're running away from him every time they see him up in the box. And Nwosu last year, he got the best of everybody, right? He was our best interior defender on the defensive line. He just was. And so he got all the doubles. He got all the attention from the offense and all of that stuff. Now with some of these other guys, like that could be there, and Bobby too. Don't forget freaking Bobby. They're the tackling machine, backing everybody up. He could get forgotten about in terms of the game plan when you start thinking about some of those other players. And Jaron Reed, good against the run as well. So yeah, he could make a huge jump just because there's nowhere to go up the middle, and so they keep bouncing it outside into the waiting arms of Uchenna Nwosu.
I like that ceiling. That start, just by the way, where does that put you? Because I think that's the interesting thing to understand against last year's crop. Max Crosby, who's just so darn good. He led the league with 22. But if you're in the 18 range, by the way, JJ Watt had I went back. I was doing this. I was like, wait, JJ Watt had 12.5 sacks. Wait, JJ Watt had 18 tackles for a loss. Myles Garrett, 18 tackles. Deron Payne, 18 tackles for a loss. Bosa, 19 tackles for a loss. So you're talking about true elite TFL company if you're springing up to 18. It's a huge jump. I think he went from 8 in 2021, his last year as a Charger, to 12, which is that's sizable, right? in his first year as a Seahawk. So if he can make that kind of a leap, which again, we're talking ceiling with the additions they made, you're taking Nwosu and you're pitching him into elite edge company, which is pretty cool, which means, you know, if that, again, ceiling wise, sure, but extend the dude, take the money and do something with that money. All right, Brandon, now you got to argue something you probably don't want to argue, but what's his floor and how can you argue it?
I'm actually happy to argue the floor, because my argument for the floor of, I don't know, 6 tackles for a loss is really an argument for Derek Hall, which why else do you draft a guy like Derek Hall early on in the 2nd round if you don't have a spot for him, or at least see a spot for him in the future? And I think it is that spot to challenge Nwosu. So if you have Boye Mafe on one side, yeah, don't shake your head. It's the fact that is the athletic profile that he's trying to fit into, is the Nwosu side. They got Mafe on the other side. They also, you know, you got Darrell Taylor. So there are multiple spots to where I could see, if the amount of depth in the rotation is there, that could shrink Nwosu's number.
So Adam, you were shaking the head. He called you out on it. So what do you want to say?
Yeah, Derek Hall wasn't drafted as a Nwosu replacement this year. That's not what he was drafted for. And like, so who are they going to take snaps away from, Brandon? Boye Mafe, who's not as good as Nwosu, Taylor, who's not as good as Nwosu, or Nwosu to get Derek Hall on the field?
It depends on where they see him, and I think that they see him on the.
Would you want 2 Nwosus then?
I would love it.
Okay, then why would you take Nwosu off the field? Like, why? I don't see Hall being the guy that's eaten into Nwosu snaps. I think that's more of a Bruce Irvin, Boye Mafe situation, soaking up those.
Just saying, it's part of the always compete atmosphere. If Mafe and Hall end up being your best guys, those are going to be the 2 that play, and that would actually be a pretty okay situation. If it's Derek Hall who's got 18 TFLs instead of Nwosu.
That's at the edge, nice.
Oh, sure. I think it was a tough one to argue, but Brandan did a nice job there, saying 6 being the floor. I hope not. Of course, I think we all hope not. We wanted. I think if that's the Nwosu became what a great signing. Like, you look at what we paid for him now, you're like, wow, that's such a quality signing. And hopefully we're set. I said it last time we talked. Hopefully we're having a similar discussion about like Julian Love this time next year, being like, wow, like we got him at the right time, the right age, still didn't overpay for the dude, and now he's ours, right? So let's see what Nwosu can do this year. To me, all the signs for at least one of the Seahawks guys to get over 10 sacks this year, it's there. And again, Nwosu, if you go back and watch some of the film, just that freaking Chargers game, he had Herbert like it would have been like years ago called in the grasp a few times. It was he almost had him down like 2 or 3 times. Nwosu's a heck of a baller. So excited to see him play this year. And guys, I was excited to put this little laundry list together because I think it bred a fun discussion and again, allowed us to kind of go in and out of the nooks and crannies of some of these individual players or some of the units or the overall team. And I think it was a pretty fun exercise. So Brandon, if you don't mind reminding the good folks, what can they do? How can they support? And maybe we'll wrap this up for a Wednesday night.
Yeah, really help us grow our YouTube following. We're really trying to increase that number. So if you haven't yet, hit subscribe. If you're not following the show there, if you're not getting notified about when the show goes live, head on over to youtube.com/Seahawkers podcast. And yeah, that's a great way to help us right now grow the show.
Yeah. Adam, why don't you take us out, bud?
Yeah, go ahead and hit subscribe, like all that stuff. Find us on the audio side too. Like, it's the flagship show I think is most enjoyable when listened to through the earphones, So great place to find that and everything. Great discussion, Clinton. I think you came up with some good stuff today. And I think all of us 12s are rooting for all the ceilings. They're all hitting. We're going to the Super Bowl. And I think with that,
there's only one thing left to say.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.